All right, this is take two. We'll see if it'll work this time. This is the reason why I sign on so early before I start my studies, because it is now just a minute before my usual starting time, and this is the second try. We'll see if this will work. I give this just a little bit of time here to go ahead and see if it's going to work. I like to let it run for, like I said, at least a minute or so before we jump off into it, because you just never know. You never know what it's going to do. Excited for tonight's study. Tonight's study will kind of be a summary. This will be in no way, shape, or form a very detailed study, right, as most of our studies usually are, or I try to be. There won't be a whole list of details. This will be a kind of a summary. So if you are watching this and expecting a step-by-step verse and exhaustive study on end time, then you are going to be disappointed, because that is not necessarily what I have prepared for tonight. What I have prepared for tonight is going to be kind of a broad view of what I believe the Bible seems to teach when it comes to end time studies, right? I would almost even say end time maybe is not the right way of putting it, but that's what it is. The beginning of forever, maybe, right? The beginning of eternity. I don't know how to say it. But exciting times, right? Exciting time that we live in. As a Christian, it's hard to think of anything much more exciting to study out than to study out the coming of our Lord, right? I don't know of anything that gets me any more excited to study than that. And so it's a good thing, and I'm excited tonight. So we went through many of the details in the weeks past, and even before we started doing them on YouTube, I'm down at the church, over all kinds of details worth of studying. And so here in a little bit, like I said, I'll give this just another, well, it's been around a couple minutes, so we'll go ahead and jump into it. Once again, so tonight is going to be kind of an overview of the end time study that we've been doing. Once again, not extreme amount of detail, still quite a bit of detail, but not a whole lot. And this will hopefully give us a big picture. So the way I like to think about it, I'm not a puzzle guy. I don't have the patience to sit down and put a puzzle together, but I like to look at it kind of that way, right? So this will help us understand what puzzle we're putting together, right? This is the picture on the front of the box that you're looking at going, this is what it should like. Now let me figure out the pieces, right? I'm hoping this will help us see the picture on the box, right? To understand what it is that we are looking at. So we will be covering tonight from the perspective of the Olivet Discourse, and more specifically, I picked the one in Matthew just because it's the first one, probably, honestly, is why I picked it. It seemed like the right one to use. Now, some of you prophecy teachers and studying type people over YouTube, automatically red flags went up as soon as I said I was going to be using the Olivet Discourse, because there's lots of theories about the said Olivet Discourse. Some people will say that it doesn't apply to Christians, right? Some people will say that it is just for the Jews that are left behind during some rapture before the tribulation occurs. Some would say that it is only relevant to the people that were around somewhere around 70 AD when Jerusalem was overtaken. Some people say that it's extremely relevant to Christians and gives us some instruction and lets us know what to expect. And so tonight we are going to use the Olivet Discourse as our template, if you will, for this overview. So whenever we first started this study down at the church didn't know, the people of the church didn't know I had been studying it pretty hard and pretty regularly up until then. So we have our Wednesday night studies down at the church. And so I would study and put together everything I needed to put together for Wednesday night. And then I would study this when I was done with that. because this was something I was trying to understand because I didn't have any meat to get a hold of when it came to end time study. And it was something I was interested in, felt driven to do. And of course, people were right. So Christians and non-Christians alike, those will be one of the first questions, right? Usually after they ask, hey, what denomination do you belong to? Which I hate that question because denomination doesn't really matter, right? Washed in the blood and born again. That's really what matters. But then this will inevitably be the next topic, right? And so it's something that I just wanted to understand. And so I had been leaving it up to our men. We split up men and women and youth and stuff down at the church. And so I had been leaving it up to the men. And it had been kind of a fun deal. Just say, hey, you guys pick it, right? What do you guys want to study? And so they would pick a study and we would go through that. And we've been doing that. And somebody asked if we could do a study on Revelation. And I started giggling because I had been doing this study for several months, even kind of on the side. And so I said, that's fine, but I don't want to start in Revelation. I would like to start at the Olivet Discourse. And that's where we started. To me, the Olivet Discourse is the clearest, easiest to understand description of what it will look like before the Lord comes back. And we will get into some of those details here in just a second. That's the reason why I'm using the Olivet Discourse. However, you will not get all of the detail that most people, when they think end time study, that they want to get, right? They'll want to start identifying who is the great harlot and who is Mystery Babylon and who is the Antichrist and where does he come from? And is this, some would even say that all of that is done and gone away with. It's not going to get into the necessarily the minute detail. However, this will hopefully begin to answer your broader questions, such as, will the church be raptured out before the Great Tribulation or before the rise of the Antichrist? Will the church have to go through that time? This should help us answer the question of a loose, what I would call a loose order of events, right? Of what we can kind of expect to see as we go get closer and closer to the Lord coming back. This should answer those questions. This should help us to discern the time that we live in. Now, I'm going to say that, but I'm going to say this also, right? We are not going to predict when the Lord is going to come, right? Day, hour, minute, whatever. We're not going to predict that. However, we should be able to, as children of God, to look and see what the scriptures say and say, you know what? I believe this looks like it may fit the bill. And any skeptic that might watch this, I can hear what you're saying already in your head. Yeah, well, they thought that. They thought Hitler was the Antichrist, and therefore, and they were wrong then. And then Christians thought that this was the Antichrist, and that was the Antichrist, and they thought that the world was ending this time and that time, and all this good stuff. Now, mind you, those people definitely worked by the spirit of Antichrist. However, would not be the Antichrist that we talk about here, and there's some reasons why. Right? The Bible spells some of those out for us. And there's some reasons why, possibly anyhow, that those times was not the appointed time that the Lord talked about. So if you'll get into the book of Daniel, you will read over and over and over again how that the Lord said that this will all be for an appointed time. So anyhow, without me continuing to talk, because I could, let's turn over to Matthew 24, if I can get there. All right, so once again, I'm just looking over at my notes, make sure I don't want to leave nothing out here. Some people would say that this is not a good template to use. This is not something that we should be trying to understand. I think we will show as we go through this study that this is a good template to use, first of all, that this does apply to future events as well as possibly past events, but also applies to future events. And this should help us also to understand that through maybe a little more extended study, that this is applicable to Christians in the time shortly before the Lord would come back, right? So this is something that we need to take on with a clear mind and a clear head, and asking the Lord to help us as we go. So previously in Matthew chapter 23, something really interesting happens, right? In Matthew chapter 23, and you go and read it for yourself, Jesus is rebuking the scribes and the Pharisees and the what I would call the religious elite of the day, right? He was letting them know where they had done wrong, and it's very, very, very interesting. And I'm kind of ashamed to admit I haven't noticed it until today. But if you will read what Jesus was condemning them for, Jesus condemned the scribes, the Pharisees, for publicly serving God in a public light, but privately not serving God, right? That they were putting on a show. He rebuked them for long prayers, like almost like they were showing off, right? They love the praise of men, and they love to sit in the upper rooms, and he was rebuking them for all these things. He even rebuked them for stressing to tithe, but not going ahead and considering the weightier matters, is what the King James Bible says, of things such as judgment, mercy, and faith. That's going to blow a hole in the whole idea that Christians shouldn't judge, right? So anyway, such as judgment, mercy, and faith. Jesus he condemns them for killing the prophets. He condemns them at one point, if you will read, for making proselytes. It says it would be equivalent, I would say, to a missionary, right? Going today and converting somebody, praying with them, teaching them, telling them, preaching to them about Jesus, and that person converting to Christianity, and then lead them astray immediately after that. He said, listen, you lead them right to this, and then you are also leading them straight to hell because of how it is that you are doing, and what it is that you are doing, and what it is you're actually teaching them, because it's not a true sense of what it is to be part of God's elect, right? And so Jesus rebukes them for that. And so if I like to think about things from different aspects if I can. And so if we take the fact that Jesus was talking to Jewish leaders of the day, and I'm going to use that term very loosely, right? Because they were not Jews, as in they were doing the things of God. They were pretenders, if you will, right? They were putting on a show. It was all a masquerade to them. We have people today in our churches that are the exact same way. So I'm using the word Jewish leaders very, very loosely, right? But here they were, these Jewish leaders, and they were doing everything that we all would say that the apostate church, the church that falls away, the church that departs from God, is going to do shortly before Jesus coming back. And why do we say that? Well, because by the Spirit, and this is something else we need to remember, and I hear people talk about the Bible, and I hear people talk about the way things are told or described in the Bible, and they're like, well, that's the only way that the Apostle Paul could understand. Listen, the Apostle Paul had the pen in his hand, but it was by the Spirit of God that it was being wrote. So whenever we say the only way that so-and-so can understand, we need to be really careful, because we may be saying that's the only way that the Spirit of God could understand, right? And so we need to be very careful about the way that we articulate things. So here we got Jesus basically condemning the Jewish leaders of the day for doing things that we would say today the apostate church, the fallen away church, the church that has walked away from God is doing, right? And so what does he say then after that, right? This is the reason why some people will say, no, this is only about the temple in 70 AD, and others will say, no, this only applies to Jews that are here during the tribulation, and their temple will be destroyed then, right? Because there's a destruction that goes on in Jerusalem through this, and all of those things, and part of it, right, is the disciples ask, and so here's some things that I think we need to kind of set up as we go through here. Some of this is partly, however you want to say it, right? I will not take away from what occurred in 70 A.D. whenever the Romans came in, ransacked Jerusalem, tore the temple down, right? I will not take away from what occurred there. It was brutal, from what I understand. It was not good, and they had to hightail and run, the folks that could, and so some of those things. I honestly, just without trying to go into too much detail, honestly, what I think probably occurred is on a very minor, minor's not the right word, minute, smaller scale. What occurred then is what will occur on a much more global scale as we get closer to the Lord coming back. And I think I can show that as we go down through here. So these Jewish leaders were being rebuked by Jesus because they were not serving God the way that they should have been. And so, and we know once again, right, the Apostle Paul in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, he says, talking about concerning the day of our gathering together to the Lord, he said that day will not come unless there be a great falling away and that son of perdition be revealed, right? So there's two things that will have to occur before it is that the Lord comes back, according to the Apostle Paul, and our gathering together with him. And those two things seem to be that the church, the people of God, the congregation of God will have to fall away. Many of them, right, will fall away, and that son of perdition will be revealed before it is that Jesus comes back and our gathering together with him. And so I think we can use this as that. And the other problem with the idea that 70 AD was the fulfillment of all of this Olivet discourse is very clearly you have the Lord coming back and collecting the elect from everywhere, right? You have that very, very clearly. And we know what happens, biblically speaking, when Jesus comes back. Biblically speaking, what happens when Jesus comes back is the dead in Christ are raised first up out of the grave. The rest are changed in the twinkling of an eye, and we go to be with the Lord. And quite simply, in 70 AD, Jesus did not come back. And the problem with most people that run that theory completely out is they will end up making the Antichrist and Jesus coming from the same nation, and they'll have one Roman guy being the Antichrist and the other Roman guy being Jesus, and it falls apart quickly. Because he does not come as he left, and he does not come in the way that the Bible depicts that he would come, in that there is no resurrection. And also, you also have the fact that the Antichrist wasn't destroyed by the brightness of that other Roman's coming, right? Like, that's not how it worked. And so, while those things fit many of the check marks, there's no doubt about that. It is not the complete and total 100% fulfillment, quite simply because Jesus didn't come back at that time. And so, what else can we get from this, right? So if there's some things that maybe could be applied, right, are there some things that shouldn't be, and that is true. So once again, right, I think what we have is mostly a smaller version in 70 AD of what will occur in the long run, what will occur when Jesus comes back. And I find it interesting that Revelation chapter 17 even talks about well, let's just turn over there real quick. I know I told you to be in Matthew 24. I'm sorry. But Revelation 17, for those of you that's not watched the rest of these videos, anybody that watches this not live will maybe not know what I'm talking about. So it goes on to talk about the great whore Mystery Babylon, and it talks about all of that, and it talks about the beast, right? And the beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition, or go into destruction. This is why he is the son of destruction in 2 Thessalonians, right? So I find it interesting that this beast, he had a time when he was active. He had a time when he wasn't as active in some way, shape, or form. And then he has another time in which he is active. And that seems to be shortly before the Lord comes back. And it seems to be that there is destruction that comes according to per 2 Thessalonians, once again, when the Lord comes back. And so was this maybe the time when he was possibly, right? When the beast was, and then he was not, right? He was bound in some way, shape, or form, and then let back out of the pit at some point in time. We get that from the trumpets as well, like the fifth trumpet, right? And so that may be kind of what we're looking at here when we think about that. So I believe it's completely fair to say that Matthew 24 not only depicted the fall of the temple in Jerusalem, but also tells of the events leading up to Christ at the end of the age. So like King James Bible will translate it world, and people who are not proponents of this being the time when the Lord comes back, they will fight vigorously that is a horrible translation and it should be end of the age. I'm fine with end of the age. We need to understand that what age would be ending, and it seems as if Jesus ends it with him coming back. And so that must be what he is talking about. And it would be the end of the world as we know it today. It would be completely different. So without further ado, let's get into Matthew 24. I almost dropped my mouse. That was a bad deal. All right, so here's the other thing we need to cover before we get into Matthew 24. We need to talk about it a little bit more. Some will say that the Lord's coming is like a thief. Therefore, there is no signs of the Lord coming. Once again, either all of this has been fulfilled, or it'll be something that's unrecognizable, or all those good things. We got some problems with that view because Jesus condemns the Sadducees in Matthew chapter, I think it's 16, and says, look, you can discern the sky, right? If it's red in the morning, you know it's going to be a bad day. But if it's red in the evening, that it's good, or something along those lines, right? But you can't discern the time you're living in. And so it seems as if it's important that you be able to discern the time that you live in. And since it is that there will be people alive shortly before the Lord coming back, then it seems as though it would be important for them to be able to discern what time they are living in. Also, 1 Thessalonians, we are told that we, and I can't remember what chapter, I have to go back and read it again. In 1 Thessalonians, though, we are told that day won't come to us, us being the children of light, us being the people of God, us being trying to spiritually understand the things of God and physically understand, right? Trying to wrap our heads around what the Bible instructs us and tells us that those things won't come to us as a thief in the night. Now, will Jesus still be a surprise? I think so. But at the same time, we should be able to look at the events that are going on around us and say, you know what, things is pretty ripe right now for the Lord coming back, right? The harvest is ripe and ready anytime. All of these things seemingly have been fulfilled, and I don't see anything else that needs to be fulfilled. And we should be looking up, right, at this point. We should be able to discern the time that we're living in. In fact, once again, the Sadducees, Jesus rebuked them for not being able to understand what time that they lived in. So, what happens in the Olivet Discourse? So the first thing that happens is the disciples ask Jesus, right? Tell us when these things will be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world, or possibly the end of the age, right? And so Jesus answers them, and he says, take heed, let no man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For the nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilence and earthquakes in diverse places. All of these are the beginning of sorrows. So, what are we looking at? all of the things that most people think of immediately, right? Oh, there's earthquakes all over the place, and there's sicknesses and famines and all of that, those types of things. Wars, nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom, possibly ethnicity against ethnicity, or ethnic group against ethnic group, which is very timely as the time that we're living in right now. We see those things and we say, okay, is that possibly something to look at and say, well, the Bible says this would happen. Absolutely, that's something we can do. Now, we can't necessarily say, okay, well, in 6 months, the Lord's coming back. That's not what we're doing. However, we should be able to look at those things and say, listen, these things have to come to pass. According to Jesus, these things are going to happen. We need to not let our heart be troubled. However, they are going to happen. They are the beginning of sorrows. Now, I have heard people say, well, these are a no sign, right? These have nothing to do with the Lord coming back, because he says the end is not yet. Now, that would be like saying that a positive pregnancy test, a morning sickness, craving certain foods, and all of those things are not signs of labor, right? Because they're not, but you've got a baby, and you know that eventually labor's coming, and coming quickly within a matter of a few months, right? So I'm not saying, once again, right, once you see these things occur, that it's just a few months till the Lord comes back. That's not what I'm saying. In fact, I would argue that these things have been occurring since it is that the Lord resurrected, and they will continue to occur up until it is that he comes back, only at a more frequent and extreme rate, right? And I think I can find that not just biblically, but also secularly. Whenever you look at weather and the way that things have changed, that you can look at the wars and the murders and the killing of babies and all of those things. And I believe I can take that and show you exactly these things here that is spoke of, and then getting worse and worse and worse and worse throughout the ages. So let's go on to read. It says, they shall deliver you up to be afflicted and kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall rise, and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. But he that endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. Then we'll go on and read the next verse. But this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. So what is this next segment, right? So verse 8 stops with, these are the beginning of sorrows, right? The earthquakes, the famines, the pestilence, all of those things, the beginning of sorrows. So what seems to happen? What seems to be the next step through the progression? Well, what seems to be the next step is the persecution of Christians, right? Of Christians, right, being persecuted for Jesus's namesake. Now, we know, I know what skeptics, right, are already saying in their head, now wait a minute, Justin, people of God have been persecuted all the way up, since the beginning of time, and they always will be. You're not wrong. However, it will get worse, right? It will continue to get worse. In fact, for the first time that I know of ever here in the United States, at least for a short time, it was illegal to have church because of a sickness that was going around. It was illegal to have church. I believe that was just a stepping stone for what it is that is coming down the line. However, those beliefs aside, I don't want to get on my soapbox too bad. It seems like we transition into all these famines, pestilence, all this good stuff. And it seems like we're starting to transition into the persecution of the people of God, right? We also have people that hate one another, that can't stand the being around each other, right? It says, then shall many be offended and shall betray one another, and they shall hate one another. And many false prophets, and you're going to get these false prophets through every time segment, basically, that occurs down through here. And iniquity shall abound, and the love of many shall wax cold. But he that endures unto the end, the same shall be saved. So that verse 13, is repeated throughout any end time scriptures that you go through, which my Bible has been end time from Genesis to Revelation. I can't get away from it. I would love to, but I can't right now. So this is where we're at. So what does that mean, right? Those that hang on to the Lord, and you get these these type of words, right? To endure, to run the race with patience, right? Or to run it with endurance, really. And you have all of these scriptures that's like, don't fall away, don't give up. At the end of Matthew 24 here, I believe it is, or maybe it's 25, it talks about the servant that says, hey, the Lord delayeth his coming, and they kind of give up on serving God. And Jesus gives parable after parable about those types of things as well. About what it's like to be serving God and then turn away from God. There's all kinds of scriptures, right? Better to have never known the truth than to have known it and turn away from it. You're like a dog that turns on its own vomit. The scriptures are very, 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 very clear, right? That you have to stick with God as you go through these things. Now, we also know that in Revelation 13 and in Daniel 11 and many other scriptures down through, you will read about the persecution of the people of God, right? And so that seems to be kind of the time segment that we see. It says here, it says, "In this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness to the nations, and then shall the end come." That's a tricky one. That is a tricky one. So, Curious Justin tried to find a way to figure out, has it been preached to all of the nations? Has the gospel went out? What does it mean to all of the nations? Does that mean to every people group? Does that mean to recognize? No doubt nations are set up differently now than they were then, but does that mean to, whatever, if you recognize, has the gospel went to the United States? Has it went to China? Has it went to Canada? Has it went to Mexico? Has it went to Europe and France and Germany and Israel and all of those places? Obviously Israel, right? That's the easy one. Has the gospel went to all those places? Now, if you start to look that up, you will find different places and different things, and it'll be like, no, it hasn't went everywhere. Because there is not a operating amount of people living and teaching and believing this Christian life, and they're not able to teach others, right? So I think it's like the Joshua Project's one of them that you'll read about, right? And they got to have at least like 2% of the population to be Christian in order to count it as reached, right? And so I know as a preacher, right? Son is just in the wrong spot. I know as a preacher, proclaiming the gospel and accepting the gospel is two totally different things, right? Two completely different things. And so one argument is that this only meant that it must go to the Gentiles, because nations is just another word for Gentiles. And therefore, soon as the first time the gospel was preached to any Gentile, then it was effectively fulfilled that it went to all of the nations, right? Another thought process here is that it's got to be, all people groups, all ethnicities, because nations there. Our root word ethnicity comes from, our word ethnicity comes from the root word that's used in the Greek here, that is translated nations. And so you try to figure all that out, right? And say, okay, well, has it went to all the nations? I think right now it would be hard, knowing what we know about the earth now, understanding where, even looking at some of those maps, and you try to find places that missionaries or Christians have not been to, touched. I don't care if they've got a Bible in their language. I don't care if a certain amount of their population is Christianized. What I care about is, has the gospel been proclaimed in that area? And if you take the entirety of this planet, I think you probably are going to find a hard-pressed place that it has not been. I'm not saying it's been exactly everywhere in exact, right? Like, I don't think it's been to all people. There's still tribes, I'm sure, hid out in the Amazon or somewhere where Christians haven't got to proclaim the gospel to them. However, I think we're going to be hard pressed to say it hasn't went to all of the nations as of right now. I think that's going to be a hard argument to make. I'm trying to get out of that light. It's blinding me. All right, so I think that's going to be a hard argument to make, right? And so, knowing that, if that's the case, we understand that we may possibly, the beginning of sorrows and all of those things, may be, we may be kind of past that, right? Like we may be moving into this next segment of the pregnancy, if you will, right? So my wife's pregnant right now. It's very easy for me to think along those lines, and so that may be the case, right? And these things, all of these things, up until this point, up until 15, and past 15, but all the things we've covered so far, you can find them in the book of Revelation as well, and you can find them in the accounts between the Gospels and the book of Revelation. You can find them in Daniel, and you can find them in Ezekiel and Isaiah, and all these places depicting some of these same things. Now, it's clearest in Revelation, especially in the seals and the trumpets and all of that jazz, right? These same exact things that are talking about when the Lord comes back, these things will be having to occur, will be occurring before it is that the Lord comes back. And I think, anyhow, that the linchpin to say, now, wait a minute, these things have been occurring forever, and we can say, surely it has been, right? But I think the linchpin, quite possibly, is the fact that the entire world, right, in some way, shape, or form, is probably more than likely at least had the gospel message go out. Whether they received it or not, completely different, but has probably went out. I wish I could find a better way to find a good answer or a good number, a good percentage. I have no idea, right? Because the whole 2% thing, terrible percentage. And they even got a map, right? And it'll have like a red stripe where they haven't reached or whatever. And it's like, like China, which we know has a large Christian population of people. It goes like all through the Middle East, where like some of Paul's missionary trips and all that is like, it's been there. The gospel has been there. So you can't really discount that. I seen one deal, if I remember right, that talked about like something like 95% of the earth's languages. We now have a Bible for like 95% of the languages, only leaving 5% left of the languages several years ago. So that's going to be hard, right? That's like that's only 5% that don't even have a Bible in their possession or in their language. So if we think along terms of has a missionary preached to them or they heard the gospel, had the gospel told to them, it's going to be hard to find a people group, I think, that haven't had, even if you go that small, even if you go a people group, right? So say there's a country, I don't care, just pick one, and say that, they got 4 or 5 different, like, distinct people group that have different governing laws and different this and different that and different history and all that good stuff. Like within the confines of that particular country, I still think you're going to have trouble finding people groups that the gospel has not been to, went to, has not been heard, right? And it says that would happen, right? So then it goes on to talk about the abomination in verse 15. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel stand in the holy place, whosoever readeth, let him understand. Let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of the house. Neither let him which is in the field return back to his clothes. Woe unto them that are with child and them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight not be in the winter, neither on the Sabbath, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, nor ever shall be. And we're going to stop right there. So Jesus says, go back and read Daniel. He's the one that talks about the abomination of desolation, right? But when you see this abomination, that the abomination of desolation, he says to flee out of Judea, right? Get out of there, get out of Jerusalem. I think Luke says when you see the armies compassed around Jerusalem, just hightail it out. Just get out of there, right? Don't wait for the abomination that causes desolation. Just go. Now, that has always been curious to me, and this is going to get a little bit fuzzy, and I'm very sorry, but it's because I'm maybe a little bit fuzzy on it. But it seems as if there is a very real reason to get out of Jerusalem when this occurs. Now, Why? Because the seals, the trumpets, these things, they all seem very worldwide, right? They don't seem like they are centralized to Jerusalem. They don't seem like they're centralized to Israel. It seems like it is a worldwide deal according to what you read in Revelation and what you read through the seals and the trumpets and all that good stuff. So why flee out of Judah? What's the deal? I think why, and now this is I think why is because when the armies come in and they take over and they set up shop, if you will, and the Antichrist sets his shop up, to right. So he'll have to have like a headquarters. He'll have a place that he will lead his from, a place that he'll lead from. Right. It seems as if possibly that's going to be in Jerusalem. Or Judea, right? And it seems as if the Bible says to come out of her, my people, talking about the great whore, talking about Babylon. And if you haven't watched that study, you're like freaking out right now. But I really think that quite possibly that is what happens, right? The Lord says, get out of her, my people, for they will, that area, that place will have double what the rest of the world will have, right? So it'll be twice as bad there as it is everywhere else. Now, I say that, but I also think that this system and this Antichrist system will infiltrate the churches, and it will infiltrate the churches in a big way. And I think that they will try to, and then once again, I'm using the word churches loosely here, right? So I'm not talking about people that are truly blood bought and born again and serving God during this time. I'm talking about people that are much like the Jewish people that Jesus rebuked in Matthew 23. I'm talking about the people that are putting on a show and all this good stuff. I believe that the Antichrist and his system will infiltrate the church. And I believe the church will push for the Antichrist-like system that comes. And then also, scripturally speaking, if in the Antichrist system is anything like what seems like is understood through the book of Revelation, especially as far as you're going to have to worship him or be killed, beheaded, right? As far as the mark and all that. Now I know in the book of Daniel, right, there's not everybody's going to succumb to him. However, he is going to actively hunt out Christians. That's the war. That's why he's fighting. It seems as if the people are going to have to. People of God are going to have to also flee to some sort of wilderness to escape that, to be able to survive, right? Now, does that mean you quit preaching the gospel? No. In fact, many of our brothers and sisters in Christ will be martyred, much like the apostles were in the book of Acts, right? Because they will be filled with the Spirit, and they will go and they will preach and they will do. And whenever God finally says, okay, I'm going to bring them home. Excuse me. There is a verse in Revelation that says, hey, blessed are those that die in this time, for they rest from their labors, right? So whenever God allows the Antichrist to get to one of our brothers and sisters and they die, right? Head cut off, right? Don't you think for a minute that God failed. Blessed is they, because they get to rest from their labors. They will rise again. According to the scriptures, I think it's 1 Thessalonians, says that they will rise first, and Christ will bring them with him whenever he comes. So, anyhow, don't you think for 1 minute that the Lord will fail. So, it says then in verse 22, and except those days be shortened, there should be no flesh saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. So let's stop right there. Again, verse 22 tells us something very simple. Verse 22 just tells us that there will be elect around whenever the Lord comes back, right? Now, elect, what is that? Well, that is God's people. It's God's chosen people. So who are God's chosen people? God's chosen people are people that's serving God, right? That, quite simply, is the simplest way to put who God's chosen people are. Now, some of you may want to argue with that particular description, but that seems to be who it is, right? God's chosen people, God's people, people of God. And so, because there will be elect alive those days will be shortened, it says, which I think that probably means that there will be an end to those days. They won't continue forever, right? For the elect's sake, because if not, nobody, right? There will be no flesh be saved. It goes on to verse 23. Then if any man shall say unto you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not, for there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they will deceive the very elect. Now, Daniel touches on this, right? And Daniel says, look, some of them that do know their God will even fall away. And this is going to happen, right? And this is what this is saying too. This isn't if it were possible, like it's not possible. This is if there's any way possible that he will deceive the very elect. And so this talks about false teachers and false prophets, again, false Christ. Can we talk about this for just a minute? This is why I think that the locust, scorpion-looking things with man faces in Revelation chapter 5 is probably representing these false teachers and false prophets. Because the king that's over them is the king of the pit, of the bottomless pit, and his name is Destruction or Destroyer. Translated into English, that's what it would be. And so it seems as if that's what we're looking at there. And I want you to know, too, that these false Christs, I think that's probably more than just people standing at me like, I'm Jesus, right? I think it's more than that. I think it's people offering salvation, right? I can take care of you. I can help you. Follow me. Do what I tell you to do. Do as I say to do. God sent me and told me that you have to give me all your money and you'll be saved, right? I think we're also looking at those types of things. So we need to keep that in mind. Now, I also do believe that there will be people, even more so, right, standing up. There's already people, but more people even at this time standing up and claiming to be Jesus who are not. Excuse me. It says, behold, I have told you before. Wherefore, if they shall say unto you, behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not. For as lightning shineth, for lightning cometh out of the east and shineth even unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. So I'm going to stop there again. So Jesus tells us multiple times, hey, listen, they're going to say that I'm like hiding out over here and you need to go over there. Don't do that, right? Because that's not the case. Because as lightning shines from the east to the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Now, I don't take that as he's going to necessarily come in the eastern sky. I take that as everybody is going to see it, much like you would see lightning shine across the sky, right? You can't miss it. Big old bright flash of light. And in fact, that's what it seems to teach. Drink your tea, sorry. That's what it seems to teach in Revelation. That when he comes back, every eye will see him. And so there'll be no questioning when it is the Lord comes back, right? We won't have to like be sitting around like, was that the Lord or was that a falling star, right? Like we'll know when the Lord comes back. There'll be no questioning that. If somebody tells you that the Lord came back and he's hiding out over in Israel, like don't believe that, right? Just trust that you will see him when he comes. For wheresoever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. That, I believe, is talking about Revelation chapter 19, whenever the fowls of the earth are called to be where the Lord is and where the Lord's army is that destroys everything that's not born again, basically. So then Jesus says, immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light. The stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. I find it interesting that it gives all of these things. And then verse 30 says, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, which we know also in Revelation. I think it's 19. No, that's not right. Yeah, no, Revelation 19. It talks about this angel standing in the sun right before Jesus comes back. So I don't know if that's what it's talking about, but it sure seems to fit. And they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, and he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. I think it's Mark says from one end of earth to the other. I can't remember what Luke says. So then Jesus says, right, learn the parable of the fig tree. When you see these things, know that your redemption draws nigh. So, quite simply, can we look at these things? Can we look at Matthew 24 and say, is this a template for the Lord coming back? Well, Jesus seems to say that whenever he talks about the parable of the fig tree, right? He seems to say, listen, when you see these things, you know that your redemption. And what is our redemption? Well, it's whenever the Lord comes back, whenever it is that he calls us up out of the grave, whenever it is that we are changed in the twinkling of an eye, that is the redemption that we are talking about. Therefore, Matthew 24 can be used as a template for us to look at and say, okay, what are the things that we need to be looking for? Now, this is foundational level, right? You need to build upon this, and I encourage you to do your own study. You know what? Don't even watch my videos. Just go and do your own studying. Read it for yourself, study it out for yourself, and then go watch videos if you want to. But know what they're talking about in their videos, because people will lead you astray like crazy, and they'll be very good at it. So, what do we got here? What is some of those questions we asked ourselves earlier, right? Will Christians be here during the Great Tribulation, or will they be raptured out? And all of those good things, right? That people seem to want to know. Well, quite simply, if we can use this as a template, and we seem to be able to because Jesus said we could. Is there anywhere in there, anywhere at all, that we read about Christians being taken out before it is that he comes back in the second coming, if you will, when he comes in the clouds and all of that good stuff? Is there any other time that's read about through there that Christians are taken out of the way? No, it's just not there. In fact, the Apostle Paul says that the great falling away has to occur, and the son of perdition, which if you will study that out and you'll study it out thoroughly, you will find that is talking about the Antichrist. And he said he must be revealed before Jesus comes back, because Jesus is going to destroy him with the brightness of his coming. So when he comes, he's going to destroy the Antichrist by the brightness of his coming, is what it says there. And so if that's the case, and if Jesus says that the abomination that causes desolation, then there's great tribulation like never before. Well, what is that abomination that causes great desolation? Well, it says that the armies of the vile king, right, set it up, or whatever they name. I think it's the vile king, what it calls in Daniel chapter 11. Basically, read Daniel like chapter 9 through like chapter 12, and you will find what it's talking about here. And it says those that do know their God, all right, will take action, and they'll try to serve God, and they'll try to instruct, and all those good things. But it says that the army set this. Now, I have my wonders, right? I wonder if that is the image that is set up by the false prophet, not by the Antichrist, but by the false prophet, because also in Daniel it says that the Antichrist, that's what it is, it says that his army will set up the abomination that causes desolation. It says that the prophet will set up the image that will be to be worshipped. And so my question, or my thought process is, hey, I wonder if that is what the abomination that causes desolation is that image that is set up and then worshipped. It seems like at that point, that's when worship is occurring to this Antichrist-like figure. And so he also, that Antichrist-like figure, makes war with the saints and prevails against them. You also read that in like Daniel 7 or somewhere in there. The little horn, I think it is, right, makes war with the saints and has power and overcomes them. That those things are allowed. And so, quite simply, guys, I hate to break it to you, but yes, it seems as if Christians will be here during the time of the Antichrist. And the whole idea that is for unbelieving Jews is not a good idea, right? Because then it teaches that unbelieving Jews don't need Jesus; they just need to wait for the rapture to occur, and then they'll realize that it's Jesus, right? That's a terrible argument. It's going to fall apart in a hurry. I won't get into that, but anyhow, understand that, yeah, it seems as if Christians are going to be here. And most people that I have found, right, so I'll just ask a simple question a lot of times when people talk to me about it, and they're like, man, the rapture of the church is coming, and I can't wait to get out of here and get away from this great tribulation, right? And I'll just try to, in a non-argumentative way, just say, why do you believe that? Because I'm going to be honest with you, as a pastor, I would much rather stand up there and preach that, hey, you're going to get raptured out before the mark of the beast and before the worship and before all these famines and pestilence and all that good stuff. You're out of here, buddy. You're gone. I would much rather preach that. However, I would much rather preach the truth over anything. And I just don't see it. I don't see it anywhere in there. I'm not. I've looked. I've listened. I've watched videos and commentaries and debates and all of that good stuff. And I've not seen it stand. And I would like for it to. I would like for it to greatly, because who has the desire to go through all that stuff, right? And so, quite simply, right, in a very 1, 2, 3 format, basically you have the beginning of sorrows, persecution, the gospel spread all around the world, the rise of the Antichrist, right, or the abomination that causes desolation, seems to be occurring around that kind of similar time. The Great Tribulation is what Jesus calls it then, after that. And then it says sometime after that, that Jesus comes back. And that's just as simple as it can possibly get, without getting into all of the minute details of who is what and where and when and what does this mean and what does that mean. This is kind of a big forest view. This is kind of the front of the puzzle view, but it seems to be a pretty simple pattern that's repeated over and over again. It's repeated in all the Olivet discourses. None of them stray. None of them mention anything other than basically what's stated here: beginning of sorrows, persecution, gospel all around the world, the abomination that causes desolation, great tribulation like never before, and then the Lord coming back. It's repeated over and over again. That is also repeated seemingly throughout the book of Revelation. And that would make sense, right? Because God wrote both books, right? So that would make perfect sense. The Bible is not going to contradict itself. And so you will find those things described, I believe, in the book of Revelation. You will find the famines and the pestilences and the sicknesses and the calamities, and you will find the wars and the battles that occur between people of God and people that aren't of God. And you will find all of those things all wrapped up and intertwined and told in great detail through the book of Revelation. And you will also find that there's no place through there that Christians are just taken up and taken out before all that occurs. It's just not there. I know there's people that will try to use some arguments like the church isn't mentioned after, like Revelation chapter 3, and that's just false. The word church isn't, but the people of God are mentioned several times throughout the rest of the book. You also will have people that will try to claim that they're part of a particular one of those churches, like Philadelphia, I think it is the one that's like the Lord's like Jesus says something to the effect of you've done pretty good, so right, I'll keep you from the hour of temptation. Then the next verse says, so you must endure to the end, right? Just like it says here. And I find it funny that everybody picks that church. Nobody's like, well, I'm the Church of Lacedonia, right? Because that's the church that was lukewarm, right? Nobody's ever like, well, I'm the church. It was at Ephesus, maybe the first one. That I'm the part of the church that forgot their first love, right? Everyone just picks the good one. Everyone's in the good one, right? It's a bad argument. So what seems to be the best mold for me scripturally, and guys, it's not a willful mold, it's just what makes sense, right? What makes sense is beginning of sorrows, persecution, gospel all around the world, the rise of, or the abomination that causes desolation, the tribulation, which seems to be, and I'm not, so everyone's like, as soon as I say tribulation, everyone goes immediately to 7 years. No, I'm talking about from the rise of the Antichrist, or from the abomination that causes desolation until the Lord comes back. That is the Great Tribulation, because that's what Jesus calls it. From the abomination that causes desolation till Jesus comes back, that's the Great Tribulation. And then sometime after that, Jesus comes back. And that is about as simple as it can get. That is, I wanted to kind of put all of this together. Now, once again, right, I believe that Christians all around the world are being persecuted. Some of them a lot worse than others, right? Some of them in Iraq and in different countries, China, and like one of the Koreas and a whole bunch of places, right? Just martyred for their beliefs, absolutely just slaughtered for their beliefs right now, right? So you're going to have a hard time telling them, hey, no, you're going to get raptured out before that occurs, because it is occurring to them right now. And so I believe that, though, that is only going to get worse, and it's going to get more worldwide. In fact, like I said, man alive, here in the United States, a country that was supposedly founded upon the freedom to serve God, just a few weeks ago, it was illegal to serve God in a biblical manner, to assemble together as brothers and sisters in Christ. That was illegal just a few weeks ago in a lot of states. And so that persecution is only going to get worse until it is that the Lord comes back, because that's what the Bible teaches will happen. And so we need to understand that persecution for Christians will be worldwide. We do need to understand that Christians at some point in time will have to deny the mark of the beast. So we need to teach people that that's going to be the case. And we have to understand that we as Christians may have to flee in a similar manner as those in Jerusalem, right? We may have to flee in a very similar manner, because we have made temples, if you will, out of our churches, and we have made them a mockery, truthfully, most of the time, to God, because we have a mockery of the things of God, because we've done the very same thing. Guys, I'm telling you, if you've never done it, I feel like an idiot because I haven't really thought about it in this light until today. Go back and read Matthew 23 and read about what Jesus rebuked them for, and then think about the apostate church and what you think of when you think of the apostate church. Those are the exact same things, that you think of. So, guys, thank you guys for watching. I got a couple more videos that I'm working on. This will be my last live Wednesday night for a little while. We are going to start back up at the church, and so on Wednesday night studies, and so we will be down there. However, this won't be my last YouTube video. I'll keep making them, and I've got a couple of them that I'm working on. I'm working on the study side. I haven't recorded them. They will be recorded. They probably won't be live streamed because this is, you just never know if it's going to work. I may try to live stream it. It's a lot simpler. I don't have to edit it and go in and out, and it takes forever. However, we will work on that. We got a couple more studies. I'm trying to tackle them. I won't tell you what they are, because the Lord may press on me to do something else I may have missed totally. So I don't want to bait you into something that is not going to be there. But hopefully it'll be interesting studies for you guys. I thank you guys for watching. If you haven't, try to get in and study your Bible and study it in thoroughly. If I have made you mad, I hope, if nothing else, right, I have made you question things tonight, and you have said, you know what, I'm going to get in my Bible and I'm going to prove this preacher wrong. That's okay, right? Get in there and prove me wrong. Prove to me that we're going to get raptured out of here. It'd be a lot easier to preach than what I currently got. But go in, man. Study your word. If I have said anything out of line with the Lord, I pray most of all is the Lord forgive me. But I pray that you forgive me as well, because that's not my intention. I have no desire to lead anybody astray. I have no desire to, try to deceive anybody or anything like that. I pray whenever I teach and preach that I have wisdom from God, that I may be able to try to give that wisdom back to y'all, right? May be able to try to teach that some way, somehow back to you guys, because I know there is so many false teachings out there, and I don't want that for anybody. Guys, that's the summary. Beginning of sorrows, persecution, gospel all over the world, the abomination that causes desolation, tribulation, and the Lord coming back. It's as simple as I can get it. Guys, thank you guys. We'll see you next time.